Welcome to Sarah Schultz and Sian Waite. Both are teachers at Rosmini College in Auckland, and their topic was about the dawn raids
hmm
and giving a sense of history and everything to the Pasifika learners in New Zealand. So I'll hand over to you guys. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, yeah, can see it. Morning, everyone.
So we decided a couple of years ago to teach the novel Dawn Raid by Pauline Violaga Smith. Sarah, do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about ourselves first. So Rosmini College, it's a Catholic school for boys on Auckland's North Shore. Um, if Sean goes to the next slide, I think we've got like a breakdown of our student population. So we have quite a nice mixture of boys, which is always interesting. Because some schools on our shore are predominantly Pakeha European, but we've got a lovely mix of our Pasifika boys, our Maori boys. We've got quite a big Filipino population at Rosmini, and we've also got Southeast Asian. So with our course, so as Sian said, it was a couple of years ago, and we really wanted something that showed the culture of New Zealand, but we wanted to involve our Pasifika boys as well, because we have difficulties engaging our Pasifika boys with learning. So we thought if we could tap into something, tap into their culture, that would be really worthwhile. And our social studies at Year 9, they have a unit where they look at the dawn raids. So that was something we were interested in exploring a bit more.
Yeah, when the couple of years ago when the boys were in year 8, we took them to Auckland Museum, and all the Pacifica boys just wanted to spend time in the Pacifica area of the museum. So when Sarah and I picked them up in year 9, we thought we'd do something for them. But it had the benefit of teaching a lot of our other boys, particularly our internationals, that about New Zealand, because obviously what they learn overseas is a little bit different to what reality is here, particularly back then for a lot of our families. So Sarah put together some wonderful pieces of work on the Dawn Raid, starting off with New Zealand histories and starting off with sorry, I've just lost my screen. And then starting off with everything else around that. The Springboks tour, David Longy. Sarah, do you want to talk to that? Because you sort of did all of
Yeah,
that.
so we really wanted to do a New Zealand novel. So I was looking at Morris G and Sian suggested Dawn Raid, and it was brilliant because it's such a rich source of New Zealand history. So before we started teaching the novel, we spent a bit of time looking at the New Zealand history of that period. So we had in the 70s, so 1974 to 1976, the novel set in 1976. That's the period of the Dawn Raids. And it also taps into the Springbok tour. So we gave them a little bit of background context on that. So if Sian leaps to the next slide. So we looked at, so when we looked at the Dawn Raids, the New Zealand school journals had quite a good, you could order a whole set of them. And they had some quite good stories and cartoons about the Dawn Raid. And I also used newspaper articles. So we looked at Jacinda Ardern's apology for the Dawn Raids. So it was an article from The Guardian. So I read it to them, and then they did a newspaper response. And this one here is one of our students, Samisi, and his parents his grandparents experienced the Dawn Raid. So he was able to talk about that. So it was a really rich sort of learning experience for the rest of the boys. So there's some of his comments there because he said he could relate to the article because his family were in the Dawn Raid. So he's Tongan. And our Catholic values are very much about treating people well with respect. So we were able to tap into some of our school values as well, which was really good.
Yeah, it was the first time for a lot of our Tongan and Samoan boys that they engaged in class,
Mm.
that they were probably the loudest voices that were heard in the class as well, um, which was really cool. And Sarah came up with some rako sticks activities. We brought in some Māori culture as well. It's in the book they do rako sticks. So the boys made rako sticks. We raided the art department for their newspaper. Um, and we got them to do some patterns and decorated their rako sticks. And at the same time, we also did we did the song Tu Te Ramaina Iwi. What was also happening in the one year was Te Matatini, which we got to watch, and one of the people in was the Māori teacher and the head of art was in the group with Stan Walker. So we watched that live with the boys, which kind of brought in a bit of a connection to the school and was really, really good for them to see Māori culture being televised.
So the novel's written in the form of a diary of a 13-year-old girl called Sophia. And in this story, they have a teacher come in and he teaches the class Waiata and the raku sticks. So that's why we looked at it. So if Sian just goes back to the previous slide, can you go back one more? I'm looking for the Maori dictionary, so just go back. Yeah. So there's a really good online Maori dictionary. So that's a really good resource to use with your classes if you're looking at aspects of Maori culture. So I got them to look up what a waiata is, and then if you just flick forward a bit, Sian. Yeah, and then we looked at Tu Te Ramaina Iwi, and I had a little video link to Ruby Tui, so we got to have a little chat about Ruby Tui and the Black Ferns because she sings it to a crowd during the World Cup final. And we looked at the lyrics because there's quite a bit of meaning and it's about coming together and stuff. So the Raku sticks, again, YouTube. So there was a YouTube clip which went through how you roll up the newspaper and you put sellotape around it. And then I had some sort of Māori patterns, which you can see there to the right. So the boys decorated their sticks and then they just sellotaped those all on. So if you just click to the next one. So that's some of their work there. And then we watched a video. I got permission from Auckland University to use it. And that goes through all the different sort of movements involved in using raku sticks. So I think we've got, yeah. So Sian, do you just want to play the videos of our boys in action?
But the boys all got engaged. They
did.
got a bit cross with each other because some of them dropped the sticks.
And they've got
And
to
there it is
throw
in the
them to each
video.
other.
Yep.
So it got a little bit chaotic, but it was good. It was good.
Yeah, they all thoroughly enjoyed it. So when we read the book, the Pasifika boys, their engagement went off the charts. They were able to help us. They corrected our pronunciation of a lot of the names, a lot of the words that were used. When it came to cultural food and items that were talked about in the book, they were the ones that kind of led the discussions. They sat in silence most of the year, but during this term and a half, they were shouting out. They just wanted to be heard. And a lot of very personal stories came out. One of the boys talked about how his granddad was sent back 7 times. And his mum was very little, obviously, when it happened. So for them, they got to be heard, which was very, very important. They also quite liked the physical nature of it. They got to get up and move around and make some rako sticks. So we also then got the Polynesian panthers in. So we've had them come in for the past couple of years now.
Yeah, 3 years. This was the third year
3
this year.
years. Yeah. And so this is one of the boys. They had to write recount
Yeah, recount. Yeah.
with sentence starters and things, but this is what one of our Pacifica boys wrote, was that just what they meant and what they did and what that meant for Pacifica people in New Zealand was actually quite big. We invited all of our Pacifica students every year. We invite the families every year. And the parents come and they listened. Oh, sorry, I misspelt listened to listed. Sorry, to the Polynesian Panthers. A lot of the senior boys who were completely disengaged and were there for the rugby season came up, talked to the Polynesian Panthers, shook hands
Mm,
with them. The respect that they showed was, it was a different side of those boys, which was really nice to see. Parents, we catered a lunch. The parents were invited. They brought food in. They brought leis for the
mm,
Panthers. Conversations and stories were all shared, and it was a really nice community kind of feel. The parents come most years to the talk, and the Pacifica boys come most years. They don't sign up, but they all just kind of wander in, and
yeah.
yeah,
So
so that's why I chose.
I just had a sudden thought. Does everyone know what the dawn raids are? So it was a policy. It was Labor first and then National, and the idea was so in the 70s there was an oil crisis, so there became a real stress on jobs. So it was a policy where they rounded up so-called overstayers and sent them back to their respective countries. But unfortunately, it tended to target Pacifica people, where most of the overstayers were actually from Britain or Australia or other countries. So it was incredibly racist. And in America, they had, for civil rights, they had the Black Panthers. So some people in New Zealand were quite inspired by that. So they set up the Polynesian Panthers, but the Polynesian Panthers were very much about passive resistance, so non-violent protesting. So they did a lot of protesting, but they also did really quite powerful initiatives in their communities, like they had homework centres. And they're really happy to come into schools and talk about the work they do. So there's the Polynesian Panthers Trust. So Milani, who's there in the picture, she is amazing, and Reverend Alec. So they come in and they tell their stories and about their work, and they talk about how they still work now for a more equal New Zealand, and how important it is to actually look at things like the dawn raids and the Māori land marches, and just shine a light on that aspect of New Zealand history, which is, you know, it is quite controversial. There was a lot of hurt. There's still ongoing trauma for families from the dawn raids. But by shining a light on it, we're hoping that nothing like that ever happens again. You know, you need to call out that sort of behaviour. So we've got a lovely picture here, so you can see some of the lolly leis that the Pasifika families brought in. We were so excited this year because Tingalau Ness, who's the father of Shea Fu, so he was the Minister of Culture for the Polynesian Panthers. And we've tried for about 2 years to get him in, but he hasn't been very well. But he came this year because he sings, and the boys, it was amazing. He talked about how he met Nelson Mandela, because he was involved in the Springboks protest in Auckland, and he was actually sent to prison for about 6 months, and he still feels quite sad about that because he missed that period of life in his baby son's life, Shea Fu. So he sang this. So he said he met Nelson Mandela, and Nelson Mandela shook his hand. It's when Nelson Mandela came over to New Zealand during Trogam, and he thanked him for protesting and for going to prison and for standing up against racism. And he wrote this song. So he visited South Africa and he got really inspired, and he wrote the song called Grow Little Children. So he got out his guitar and he sang it, and we were sitting there with the boys. So it was our, what was it, Sean? It was our year. So Ambrose, one of our English teachers,
It
he brought in
was
his year sevens because they do the novel. We had our year nines, so our ESOL boys. And then our history teacher, she brought in her year 12s. And then we had all our Pacifica group boys. And while he was singing, they just spontaneously, they all sort of lifted their hands up in the air and they were all doing this while I was singing. It was really quite special. Yeah.
So a lot of our boys came away with messages, and the biggest one for them was stand up for what's right, even when
Mm,
it's hard. And fighting for equality doesn't equal violence.
Mm,
And that was a big one for them. I think obviously there's a lot of what they see in the news, a lot of fighting is all violent, but there's ways of doing it that is
mm,
non-violent. And that was one of the biggest takeaways for our boys. Bit eye-opening, I think, for them.
mm,
Um, when they visited, we they tagged us. Last year, one of our students won a big art prize down in Wellington for his artwork, which was all inspired by the Polynesian Panthers. And last year, he was a Year 12 student. We emailed his parents and said, "Would you like to showcase this? We have the Polynesian Panthers come in." And for him, what he got out of this was amazing, and the parents were so proud of him.
mm,
So that's his painting from last year. The Panthers spent a lot of time talking to him about it, what it meant to them to see this and to see the new generation kind of coming through with this. And then this year, he'd done another two paintings,
mm,
and that was his last year painting on the between the two boys, and then the one on the left was the new one. And it was all about the treaty and what was happening sort of earlier this year and last year around that. So he is the arts and culture leader for this year, the boy on the left, and the boy on the right is our Pasifika leader for this year. And what they took away from this was quite a lot. They were very, very grateful that they were able to meet the three Panthers. And I think that's us, Sarah.
yeah, yeah. So I was just, as I said, what really struck a chord with the boys, Milani, she spoke about when they started protesting and joining the Polynesian Panthers, they were only 16. And their parents were really horrified by what they were doing. But she just said it was really important that they did make a stand, because she said their parents had the attitude where you just, you put up with it and you just got on with things. And they said, well, no, it's not right. So that was quite a powerful message to the boys, because they said, you might think you're too young, but if you see something like that, some sort of injustice, you can call it out. So yeah, it was just such it was a really good experience. So it was a very powerful tool, this novel. It was just a really rich source of learning. And getting the Polynesian Panthers in, it was amazing, because you got to see like history sort of in action. You got to hear firsthand accounts. So yeah, it's a really exciting unit of work. Yeah.
The
So
author
that's
has written a follow-up novel called
yeah.
The Apology as well, which deals with Jacinda Ardern's apology. And there was a book launch actually after the Polynesian Panthers came to our school this year. There was a book launch for the
Mm,
book later that week or the following week, which is something that we are going to look at for next year,
mm,
maybe both books or something
mm,
um, to do with the boys, because it's quite important for us and for them, I think, to teach this. I will stop screen sharing. There we go.
Well, thank you for that. I was born in 1976, so don't actually remember those. One of my first memories, that was 1981.
yeah, the
And
Springboks.
my dad put us all in the car because we were living in Hamilton at the time, and we all shot up to Auckland just for the day. While my sister, who was a late teenager, she promised she wouldn't go on the pitch, and she didn't, but she came home covered in somebody else's blood.
Mm,
And likewise, I've used that because the ministry's put out a really good lower, like primary school level resource on that called The Game with illustrations by Toby Morris. And that's really got children interested as well,
mm,
particularly because they were able to send messages to my sister and get her to reply to them and to find out about what it was like and why bother standing up for things you don't believe in,
mm.
standing up against those things. Does anyone else have questions for Sarah and Sian?
Um, I do have a question about specifically around the language. You mentioned that, yeah, because I don't know the book, I was just wondering how the language works in the book. Is it very other than the Pasifika words or
Mm-hmm.
Te Reo Māori. How did that go? Did you find that they, in terms of the English language or
Mm-hmm.
the other language, you mentioned with Tūtira Mai, but also
Mm-hmm.
what kind of language work did you have a chance to do, or were you mainly focusing on content and it happening sort of incidentally?
No, we did do vocab as well. It uses a lot of colloquial language, so we had to spend quite a bit of time unpacking that. Um, so we had tasks. We would take sort of bits of vocabulary, and sometimes we'd take like keywords and get them to boys to translate it into their other language to just reinforce that understanding. It's pitched at year 7, sort of year 7 level, and we were teaching at year 9. The first year we did it was year 9 and 10. So it is quite doable. So it doesn't have too many sort of Māori and Pasifika words in there. So we did spend a little bit of time because they did a umu and a hangi. So we spent a bit of time going through what that was. And then it was quite good because we did a recount about what your favourite food is in your culture. Yeah, so I'd sort of separate it into different parts. So, I'd read so much and then, there'd be questions about it in different sort of activities.
There's a lot of very heavy scaffolding as well for a
Yeah,
lot of
very.
it.
Mm,
In terms of grammar and things like that, it was built into what we did. So the newspaper responses, there was grammar built into that. With the
mm,
recount, we built the grammar into that.
mm,
The book itself, we focused on content and the vocabulary, with the grammar coming into the writing activities they did
mm,
around that. Um, some of the recounts were published in the school newsletter as well, after some editing and proofreading processes that they went through.